What could a baker have to do with the greatness of Rome? Imagine a bustling city, full of life pulsing to the rhythm of thousands of voices, carts and markets. But in the midst of this frenzy, there is a silent, invisible figure playing a crucial role: the baker. When we think of the Roman Empire, we may picture gladiators, emperors, epic battles. But who was really feeding this civilization? No, it wasn't the soldiers or the senators. It was the men and women who, day after day, with their hands, turned a simple handful of flour into something much bigger: the bread that sustained the entire empire. Imagine this. It's early morning. The first rays of the sun are just beginning to appear, but the baker is already awake. The city is still asleep, but he is already working, and his mission is clear: to feed Rome, a city that never stops, that always needs more. Without them, the empire would have fallen. And you know, bread wasn't just food, it was power. Don't leave yet, because what we're about to discover today will completely change the way you see daily life in ancient Rome. This trade, which for many was invisible, was actually the pillar that upheld the city, the force that kept Rome fed, connected, and united. Do you want to know how? Stay until the end. In ancient Rome, the baker's profession was essential. But who were these people who worked in the shadows of the great city? Bakers were not just common workers. Although their work didn't have the fame of gladiators or generals, their role was vital for the daily functioning of the empire. The Roman baker, for the most part, was a low-class worker, but their work was crucial for social stability. In Rome, the population was massive, and the need for basic foods like bread was constant. In fact, more than half of the city's inhabitants relied on bread as their main source of sustenance. Additionally, the Bakers' Guild in Rome was one of the oldest and most organized. Despite not having the prestige of other professions, such as those of artisans or soldiers, bakers were highly respected within their community. They were part of a structure that ranged from the humblest bakers to those working in large city bakeries, which supplied not only the local population, but also the soldiers of the Roman army. This trade, although common, was key to maintaining social stability. Bread became a form of currency, and in many cases even a symbol of Roman power. Can you imagine that a single profession could be so essential to keeping an entire empire standing? A Roman baker's day started before dawn. While the city was still immersed in the quiet of the night, the baker was already in their bakery, preparing what was needed to feed thousands of people. The first light of the sun was just beginning to show, but the work was already underway. The day began with preparing the dough: flour, water, yeast, and salt. These were the basic ingredients, but the baker's skill lay in knowing how to combine them. The dough had to rest for just the right amount of time to achieve the perfect texture, ready to be transformed into bread. The Roman baker not only had to be an expert in bread preparation, but also in managing the fire. Ovens were the centerpiece of the bakery. Made of brick or stone, these ovens were heated with firewood and required great skill to maintain a constant temperature. The baker had to make sure the oven was just right, not too hot nor too cold, because any mistake could ruin the production. While the bread was baking, the baker would attend to customers who came to buy their freshly baked bread. The demand never stopped, as bread was the staple food for all levels of Roman society. Plebeians, merchants, soldiers, everyone depended on this food that, despite its simplicity, was the sustenance of Roman life. Throughout the day, the bakery remained busy. Some bakers worked alone, while others, especially in large bakeries, had assistants. These helpers aided in kneading, transporting bread, and selling it. Bakers also had to be attentive to special orders, such as breads for festivals or those destined for the Roman soldiers, who required large amounts to stay fed during their campaigns. Each day was a repeat of this routine: prepare, bake, sell, and repeat. But there was something much deeper in all of this. A baker's work wasn't just physical, it was part of a system that kept Rome standing. Without bakers like him, the city would have been unable to sustain itself, and the Roman Empire as we know it might not have existed. In Rome, bread was not just food, it was much more. It was a symbol of stability and prosperity. The baker not only fed the population, but also helped maintain social peace in such a vast and diverse city. In ancient Rome, bread was so essential that it became a key political tool. The Roman government understood the power of bread in its society. That's why they implemented policies such as the Cura Annonae, a strategy to ensure a constant supply of bread at affordable prices for the population. This system guaranteed that the Romans, especially the poorest, had access to this basic food, preventing hunger from becoming a cause of uprisings or disturbances. In fact, bread was distributed either for free or subsidized at certain times to calm the crowds, which led to the famous Roman phrase panem et circenses, bread and circuses. But it wasn't just the poor who depended on bread. Roman soldiers were also largely fed by this food. During their campaigns, the Roman army consumed massive amounts of bread, making it a crucial strategic resource to keep the soldiers marching, ready to conquer and expand the empire. Without bread, there would have been no army, and without the army, Rome would never have achieved its greatness. Bread was also a symbol of Roman unity. Rome was a vast empire made up of different regions and peoples. However, despite their differences, they all shared the same bread. This not only united the Romans in a practical sense, but also symbolically. Bread represented the collective strength of the empire, the foundation on which Rome stood, fed by the work of bakers, but also by the unity and collective effort of all its inhabitants. And let's not forget the importance of bread in the daily lives of the upper classes. Although aristocrats and senators did not depend solely on bread for sustenance, they did use it in banquets and celebrations. They prepared special breads, more sophisticated, even with exotic ingredients such as honey, aromatic oils, and dried fruits. These breads were served as part of the elite's feasts, further highlighting the centrality of bread in Roman culture. Bread, in its various forms and presentations, was not just food. It was the beating heart of Rome. Roman bakers were not only experts in their craft, they were also innovators. Although bread itself seems like a simple food, behind its production were technologies and techniques that made the difference between mediocre bread and one that could feed an entire empire. One of the great advances in Roman baking was the use of water mills. These mills revolutionized the way grain was processed. Instead of grinding by hand, which was a long and exhausting process, the Romans installed hydraulic mills that used the power of water to grind large quantities of wheat more efficiently. This advance allowed bakers to produce more bread, faster, and of better quality. The watermill was one of the first large-scale applications of hydraulic technology, and in many cases, these mills were located on the outskirts of Rome, near rivers, ensuring a constant supply of fresh flour. Wood-fired ovens, another key piece of Roman baking, also evolved. Unlike the more primitive ovens of early civilizations, the Romans perfected stone ovens, which could retain heat for longer, and more importantly, could be controlled with greater precision. The Roman baker had to be an expert at adjusting the oven's temperature, as the success of the bread depended largely on thermal stability. In addition, the Romans didn't just bake bread, they experimented with different types. Roman bakers created breads with various textures and flavors, some denser and others lighter. One of the most popular was the panis quadratus, a square bread that was characterized by its distinctive shape and spongy texture. This bread was used both in the daily diet of Romans and in religious ceremonies and banquets. But the most impressive thing was the ability of Roman bakers to produce large quantities of bread. Industrial-scale bakeries in Rome were a common sight. These were large facilities with multiple ovens and a large number of workers, and they were often located near markets or forums where the bread could be sold quickly. In fact, some of these bakeries were so large that they produced thousands of loaves of bread per day, enough to supply an entire district of the city. Mass bread production, enabled by these technological innovations, allowed Rome to keep its vast population fed. And not only that, it allowed the empire to continue growing. Every advance in baking was a step toward the expansion of Rome, because an empire without bread could not stand. Although Roman bakers were not as celebrated as gladiators or generals, their presence and craft were deeply integrated into Roman culture. Bread as an essential food was not only seen on Roman tables, but also reflected in art and literature. In paintings, mosaics, and frescoes decorating Roman homes, bakers were often depicted in their work environment. These depictions not only documented the trade, but also reflected the respect and importance this work had in the daily life of Rome. It was not unusual to see bakers working in markets or even at large banquets, where bread was served as part of the opulence and abundance of the elite. One of the most fascinating aspects is that, although most bakers came from the lower classes, their craft was recognized in religious contexts. In some temples, bread was offered to the gods, and bread was used in religious rituals to ensure the prosperity of the city and the protection of its inhabitants. Bakers, although humble, played an important symbolic role, as their products were part of the sacrifices and offerings dedicated to the Roman gods. In Roman literature, bread also appeared as a symbol of daily life and, in some cases, of political stability. Poets and writers often mentioned bread in their works, not just as food, but as a reflection of the general well-being of Rome. The philosopher Seneca, for example, emphasized the importance of bread in the life of the Romans, suggesting that its availability was a direct reflection of the empire's stability. If bread was scarce, it was considered an indication of deeper problems in society. But bread also appeared in popular sayings. The famous Roman phrase, panem et circenses, meaning bread and circus, reflected the idea that the Roman people needed both food and entertainment to stay calm and satisfied. This phrase, which arose during political crises, showed how bread, beyond being a necessity, had become a political tool to control the masses. Bread not only fed the bodies of the Romans, but also nourished the culture, beliefs, and politics of the empire. Bakers, although mostly unknown and anonymous, were essential for maintaining not just the body, but the soul of Rome. Imagine for a moment Rome, the eternal city, a bustling metropolis with thousands of voices, empires, battles. But deep down, what truly sustained Rome, what gave it life, was a humble and essential craft. Roman bakers, working in the shadows of their bakeries, didn't just bake bread, they kept the machinery of the empire standing. Bread was not just food, it was the symbol of Roman stability, the strength of an empire that expanded and prospered thanks to the tireless work of those who, with their hands, fed an entire nation. Without bread, there would have been no Rome. Without bakers, the empire would never have reached the greatness we know today. The work of these unsung heroes is often forgotten, but their importance can never be underestimated. Bakers, like soldiers in their battles, were essential to the success of the empire. Without them, Rome would not have been possible. So next time you think of Rome, don't just think of gladiators or emperors, think of bread. Think of those men and women who, with their dedication and skill, supported an entire empire. The history of Rome is incomplete without the history of its bakers. Had you realized how crucial bread was in Roman life? What other trades in ancient Rome might have been just as essential, but equally forgotten? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you were surprised by the story of the Roman bakers, subscribe to the channel and share this video so more people can learn about the incredible importance of everyday professions in ancient Rome.